So after 60 amazing hours, I finally beat Baldur's Gate 3. To be honest, I didn't have so much fun playing a game for a really long time. Thus, making a review of this masterpiece of a game is something that simply had to happen. It was inevitable. After all, I can easily place Baldur's Gate 3 right next to my beloved Knights of the Old Republic as one of the absolute best RPGs I've ever played. And there are multiple reasons for that. Let's get started. First thing first, the game is massive. I skipped a lot of side quests and still it took me more than 60 hours to complete it on the easiest difficulty possible. The story is incredibly interesting and in many cases you simply won't want to skip the dialogues just because you want to know what this person has to say and why he has to say it. In other words, the characters matter, the storyline matter, especially the storylines about the four main characters in your team. You care about them, they are not some soulless, speechless NPCs just placed there to fill some space and to deal some extra damage. They have purpose and they mean something. Quite frankly, I don't remember the last game I played where I really loved all the characters. In fact, I cared about them so much that I wanted to complete all of their story quests, regardless of the fact that I could have easily skipped them and just focus on the main storyline. I loved Shadowheart's story so much that at a certain point she felt like she's the main character of the game. I wanted to help her. I wanted to be part of her story and I wanted to witness how her story ends. That was absolutely mind-blowing. Every single story in this game was captivating. Furthermore, the choices that you make during the time span of the game are really impactful. Some of them can help you a lot, others can hinder your progress, and some of them can literally kill you. So at the end of the day, it all boils down to the same thing. The story matters. You can't just be running around killing people and things, because sooner or later this will backfire on you. And I loved it. Which is super weird because I'm usually the type of player who doesn't get into the stories of the game that much. I prefer the action, the slashing and dicing, the violence and so on. However, Baldur's Gate 3 got me completely invested in the story to a point where I wasn't really wanting to fight. I wanted to explore and progress the story, something that almost never happened to me before. It was just the game being super good at selling its story, sending its message. Now when I think about it, there wasn't even a single thing about the story that I didn't like. It had it all, from the visual design of the characters to the incredible voice acting. Everything was phenomenal. Second thing, the variety of characters, classes, subclasses in this game is ridiculous. The different combinations and builds that they unlock is endless. For instance, I was running an Oathbreaker Paladin with a fighter champion cleric and a caster druid. This team was simply unbeatable late game, especially with all the summons that were coming from the cleric and the druid. However, the good news is that at any time you can rest back and form a completely different team, so in a way you can keep changing your build during the entire time span of the game without any penalty. You just have to spend a small amount of gold for it. I found out to be extremely efficient and fun. You want to experiment? Go ahead, there are literally no limits, no barriers. Just a small fee of gold that needs to be paid. In fact, I just beat the game yesterday and now I want to start over or at least go back to an old save just to try some classes that I didn't experience in my initial run. And that says something. The third reason why I believe Baldur's Gate 3 was so great was the fighting. I was literally shocked at how realistic it was and I was truly impressed by the AI. For instance, at this footage that you're currently seeing, I was still learning the game mechanics and this was literally my breaking point. From this moment on, I loved the game, I completely loved it. Look at this situation. I didn't want to take the open fight in the hole, in the big hole, so I decided to play it smart. I pulled the enemies to the narrow corridor right next to the door, and next to the gate, let's go it that way, and my plan was to kill them with spells after I disabled their movement. So I cast a spell that immobilizes them if they enter the zone of the spell. After this is done, I can easily take them down one by one with arrows and other fancy spells. And look at what happens now. To my horror, one of my enemies will go around using this tiny amount of space not affected by the spell, and the other one will simply jump over it, completely demolishing my entire strategy in the process. Not only that, but after jumping, he actually heals the other guy. So the moment I saw that, I was like, okay, this game is something different. And this happens on the easiest difficulty level. Your opponents are really smart. Not only they try to avoid your spells, but they can also push you from a high building, for example, killing you in the process. So in general case, please don't stay near any edges as you can get pushed and get killed. On top of that, there is friendly fire of spells, and more or less any offensive mechanics, and that makes sense to be honest. If you cover the ground with fire, it will burn also your characters that step foot into it. If you place zone of difficult terrain somewhere, it will negatively impact your guys walking into it as well. All of this makes sense, and it brings me to the next point, the difficulty of the game. I will repeat myself, I beat it on the easiest difficulty level and yet it was tough. Granted, I never played any of the previous installments of Baldur's Gate, but there are fights so brilliantly staged that it will simply challenge you to your breaking point. For example, there is an ambush fight in Act 2 that is so well designed and so hard to beat that after around 10 failed attempts I simply gave in and I decided to be diplomatic. And I want to focus on one thing, the fights were hard, but hard in a different way. They require you to rethink your strategy, the spell sequence, the positioning, the items and potions you're about to use. None of those fights are the type of fights where you make one mistake and you get one-shotted and everything ends. This is the annoying type of hard which I never met in Baldur's Gate 3. Of course, there are places where if you're not careful, one of your characters can get instantly killed, but those are exceptions. If I have to summarize, I love the difficulty of Baldur's Gate 3 because I was challenged by the environment, by my enemies, by the complexity of the game itself, and I wasn't challenged to avoid a projectile that one-shots me, which is the general perception of hard nowadays. And lastly, let's talk about the items. In Baldur's Gate 3, the items do matter. Finding a legendary item is significant and it doesn't happen often. In fact, certain legendary items will completely change your character playstyle and will make him twice or even 3 times stronger. Thus, completing side quests, opening locked chests and solving environment puzzles can actually be quite rewarding. So long story short guys, Baldur's Gate 3 has great story, amazing characters, endless variety of builds, extremely fun fighting mechanics, smart enemies, impactful items and challenging battles. All in all, it is an almost perfect game, and this brings me to the negatives, which are not many but a few. I need to talk about them. The first 2 negatives are battle related. I never found a way to wait on my turn in Baldur's Gate 3. What I mean by that is simple. Whoever has the higher initiative in the game attacks first. However, what if I have higher initiative than my opponent, but I don't want to use it now, I don't want to use my turn now, I don't want to attack, I don't want to move. All I want to do is to keep my turn, but use it after my opponent does his. So in a way, I wait and then I strike. I don't want to do anything now, I just want to wait. Unfortunately, there is no way to do that in Baldur's Gate 3. If you want to wait, you simply miss your entire run. You don't do it on later stage, you just miss it. I find that to be disappointing considering the fact that even super old games like Heroes and Might and Magic 3 have this mechanic. The second problem was that I couldn't speed up the enemy turns. Sometimes I was facing hordes of enemies, like 20 enemies or something like this, and waiting for their turns on slow or let's say normal speed was a little bit tedious. So if they implement a way to speed up the enemy turn, that would be perfectly fine. And by the way, if this is now in the game, please let me know how, because I literally tried everything, I couldn't find it. And the last negative about the game is the fact that there are some buggy quests and some bugs in general. Especially in Act 3, unfortunately there is one quest which in my opinion is bugged and it is part of the main storyline. The good news is that you can go around it. I really hope this is going to get fixed soon. The camera movement was really weird as well. Even though at the end of the game I got used to it, I never liked how the camera is handled in this game. I think it can be better. And more or less that's it guys. There you have it. Baldur's Gate 3, one of the best games in the genre. If you haven't tried it yet, rectify this error immediately. After all, the Steam stats don't lie. This game is a masterpiece. See you next time guys. Take care.
Perfect.